حلقة جديدة من برنامج حديث الرياض، نتحدث فيها عن تأثير الرواية والمقالات محليا وعالميا، وكيف يستطيع المؤلفين خلق التأثير من خلال مؤلفاتهم عبر ندوة بعنوان عبر عدسة الكاتب، تأملات العائلة والمجتمع والطبيعة. ضيفها الكاتب والروائي العالمي جوناثان فرانزين، ويحاوره الأستاذ علي المجنوني. جوناثان فرانزين هو كاتب أمريكي بارز، ولد في عام 1959 واشتهر بروايته The Corrections الصادرة في عام 2001 التي ترجمت لأكثر من 40 لغة وفازت بجائزة الكتاب الوطني للخيال. كتب فرانزين عدة روايات ناجحة أخرى، منها فريدوم التي صنفها النقاد كتحفة أدبية وحازت على جوائز مهمة. روايته الأخيرة كروس رودز حظيت بإشادة واسعة واختيرت كأفضل كتاب للعام من قبل باراك أوباما. إلى جانب الروايات أصدر 4 مجموعات من الأعمال غير الخيالية وكتب ترجمات، كما اهتم بحماية البيئة وأنتج فيلما وثائقيا عن الطيور المغردة.
I am the enemy of literary seriousness. People hear serious literature and they think it's not funny, it's not fun. So I want to project my idea of literature, which is something funny and delightful, not important. It's satisfying to finish a puzzle. There are moments of satisfaction when you're writing a novel when you figure it out. That's satisfying, but I think this is true of most professional writers. No amount of awards. AI is not intelligent. It is imitative and derivative. There are hardly 2 worse adjectives you can apply to any work of art than imitative and derivative. So no, I don't feel very threatened by it.
اليوم سنتكلم عن مجموعة من المحاور التي عددناها مع الكاتب الأمريكي جوناثان فرانزين. سنتحدث عن طريقته في الكتابة، أو سنستمع إلى بعض النصائح التي يقدمها للكتاب المبتدئين خاصة والكتاب عامة. أعتقد أنه سيفيدنا من حيث تقديم مجموعة من النصائح، إضافة إلى مشاركتنا تجربته الطويلة في كتابة روايات ناجحة.
أنا من أحد معجبين هذا الكاتب جوناثان من نشر كتابه بيوريتي من 2015، وأنا مرة مهتم بهذا الكتاب.
ما كنت أعرف الكاتب من قبل وما قرأت رواياته، لكن الآن أنا جدا متحمس لقراءة روايته.
الصراحة شدني كتابه لأنه عبارة عن خيال، ويمديه يكون تأثيره على المجتمع أكبر، عبارة عن الطبيعة وعن العائلة، فبيكون تأثيره جدا كبير على المجتمع.
أتمنى أن الكاتب جوناثان يتكلم عن روايته بشكل أكبر ويعلمنا عن النصائح أو الأمور اللي كتبها خلال هذه الرواية.
This is like this deeply, incredibly, uniquely human thing that we do. You learn to read. Do you want to have somebody else do that for you?
Where do you think the novel is going? It has to be going somewhere.
The definition of a novel is something that somebody wants to read. You have to make your eyes move word to word, and you have to turn the pages.
Good evening, everyone. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Ali al-Majnouni, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's moderated discussion with renowned American novelist and essayist Jonnathan Franzen. He is the author of 6 best-selling novels, including Corrections, Freedom, Crossroads, as well as several collections of nonfiction. Mr. Franzen has won and been nominated to several literary awards and prizes, including the National Book Award, which he won in 2001 for his novel Corrections. In 2010, he was named the Great American Novelist by Time magazine. In a major recent survey of the top books of the 21st century, his novel Corrections was placed among the top 5. It's such an honor to host here in Saudi Arabia an author of such international literary prominence. Please join me in welcoming Joonathán Franzén.
That's very grand music for just a novelist and somebody who likes novels. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, John. Let me start with a very broad question. You have written about culture and more specifically about reading and the fact that reading and books are in crisis. From time to time, we hear voices either dismissing or challenging the value of the novel and actually discouraging reading novels. So what would you say in response to that? Why do we read novels today? And why is that important?
I'm not going to talk about novels, but I knew you were going to ask me about reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting backstage with my jacket over my head thinking before we came out here. And this is probably not an original idea, what the world would be like without reading. As John Lennon said, it isn't hard to do. But imagine that AI, which is rapidly developing, I would guess that within 5 or 10 years, it would make it unnecessary to ever even learn to read. You would grow up speaking, and as soon as you needed to communicate, you would talk to your AI assistant. If you needed to remember something, it could be encoded and you'd be reminded when you needed to be reminded. If you wanted to express yourself in any way, it would find a way to express it, and it would express it pretty well. And if you wanted to read, well, you would just feed the text to the machine, and the machine would read it to you. And it would probably be pretty good at that. It could do things like you could say, you're reading too slowly, speed it up a little bit. Or, I already know what's in that paragraph. Let's just give me a one-sentence summary of that. And the question then is anything lost? One obvious answer is that you kind of need to feel day to day that you have a purpose in life. It could be if we were liberated from all labor and all demands, if every need was satisfied without our having to do anything. Part of being a human, part of what gives satisfaction to being a human is exercising your unique abilities, the unique abilities we have as human beings. And I'm a writer, so of course I think this, but I think the most incredible ability we have is related to language, and particularly all the civilization we have pretty much begins with the invention of written language. So this is like this deeply, incredibly, uniquely human thing that we do. You learn to read, and then you learn to make letters, and you learn to write. Do you want to have somebody else do that for you? It was the question I wanted you all to think about is, well, imagine if we didn't have to read or weren't allowed to read.
But I want you to talk about fiction.
Fiction, oh yeah.
Novel. What has the novel provided us in the past? What can still offer to us today?
One of the things I talked about was how there's this incredible intimacy of connection between the author of a text and the reader of a text. And that's particularly true, I think, for the novel, because the novel is, along with poetry, the richest form of written expression ever created. Yesterday, when I'm reading Jane Austen, who died in like the 1820s. I can be sitting in a dentist's office and I open a volume of Jane Austen, and Jane Austen is speaking to me in her voice, in her truest voice, inside my head. And words she put down in ink on paper more than 200 years ago are creating these scenes in my head the way they did for the first readers of Jane Austen when she was still alive. So I think that quality of intimate human connection that you get when you are enveloped in someone else's world, a world they have created in words, I think that's the heart of the novel's appeal. I'm not saying it's good for you. Maybe it's bad for you to want to escape your life. Maybe you should always be doing really important things and not be escaping into other worlds and other voices. But for those of us who've had that experience, it's a wonderful one.
People are always talking about the novel being on crossroads, and people talk about directions of the novel. What are your concerns for the novel as a literary genre, but also where do you think the novel is going? It has to be going somewhere.
It's important to remember, I think, that the novel can't develop in this purely formal way, the way visual and to some extent musical expression can, because for the very, very simple reason that a reader has to turn the pages. The definition of a novel is something that somebody wants to read. And so in music, you can just like create the most crazy alienating sound and the person doesn't have to do anything. They just kind of listen. They just sit there. You'd actively have to close your ears to it to not hear it. Same thing with completely crazy visual art. You don't have to do anything. I mean, there is a way to actively look, but you don't have to actively look. But with a novel, you actually have to read it. You have to make your eyes move word to word, and you have to turn the pages. And that means it's a fundamentally much more conservative form of art than most forms of art.
So let's talk about some of the themes that you treat in your novels, and maybe also connect that what we have just said. You write about family a lot in your novels, families that are dysfunctional, families in crisis. What has drawn you to this theme? And I would like also to connect it to, I think, something that you have said about the social consciousness novel, and that you're not in favor of that kind of novel. Isn't family is also a social unit?
Certainly in a more tribal culture, family is very important. And it becomes, it has a tremendous value socially or an importance socially. I come from a Western culture which is much more atomized. You might know your cousins, but your cousins' cousins, where, I don't know them and I don't care. It's different. So I would say that in America, the family is in a certain amount of tension with the larger political and social structures. What interests me about it is that you can't get away from it. You can literally get away from it. You can run away from home. You can disown your child. You can move to another country and stop answering email. You can literally get away from it, but you can't you have a mother. You've got a father. Everybody does. And if you've got a child, that is always your child. And these are primal connections. There's a heat there, and there's drama there. You look at the great narratives of ancient history, there's usually a father, a brother, a sister, a mother, a son, a daughter. These are where the stories are, because we immediately sense, oh, this is intense, this is hot. And if you're a novelist, you're trying to make the page alive. You're trying to heat things up. And I consider it almost lazy of me that I keep going back to families. There is a label that is applied to families in some of my books that I strenuously reject, and that is the label of dysfunctional. I mean, they're functional. They don't function particularly well, but, the children are loved. They're not dropped on their heads. The parents are not opioid addicts. It's a functional family, time after time.
I do have a follow-up question, but also I would like to remind the audience, please start thinking about questions for Mr. Franzin. I believe you have question cards and pens in your seats. Once you have them ready, you should be able to give them to one of the ushers there. Okay. Yeah, why not take this moment and also read a couple of passages from corrections.
I'm going to read slightly longer because it's at the very beginning of the novel, and I don't need to tell you anything except there's an old couple, Enid and Alfred Lambert, who have a big leather chair. When Alfred retired from the Midland Pacific Railroad, he set about replacing the old cow-smelling black leather armchair in which he watched TV and took his naps. He wanted something really comfortable, of course, but after a lifetime of providing for others, he needed more than just comfort. He needed a monument to this need. So he went alone to a non-discount furniture store and picked out a chair of permanence, an engineer's chair, a chair so big that even a big man got lost in it, a chair designed to bear up under heavy stress. And because the blue of its leather vaguely matched the blue in the old Chinese rug, Enid had no choice but to suffer its deployment in the family room. Soon, however, Alfred's hands were spilling decaffeinated coffee on the rug's beige expanses, and wild grandchildren were leaving berries and crayons underfoot, and Enid began to feel that the rug was a mistake. It seemed to her that in trying to save money in life, she had made many mistakes like this. She reached the point of thinking it would have been better to buy no rug than to buy this rug. Finally, as Alfred's naps deepened toward enchantment, she grew bolder. Her own mother had left her a tiny inheritance. Interest had been added to principal. Certain stocks had performed rather well, and now she had an income of her own. She reconceived the family room in greens and yellows. She ordered fabrics. A paper hanger came, and Alfred, who was napping temporarily in the dining room, leaped to his feet like a man with a bad dream. "You're redecorating again?" "It's my own money," Enid said. "This is how I'm spending it." "And what about the money I made? What about the work I did?" This argument had been effective in the past. It was, so to speak, the constitutional basis of the tyranny's legitimacy, but it didn't work now. "That rug is nearly 10 years old, and we'll never get the coffee stains out," Enid answered. Alfred gestured at his blue chair, which under the paper hanger's plastic drop cloths looked like something you might deliver to a power station on a flatbed truck. He was trembling with incredulity, unable to believe that Enid could have forgotten this crushing refutation of her arguments, this overwhelming impediment to her plans. It was as if all the unfreedom in which he'd spent his 7 decades of life were embodied in this 6-year-old but essentially brand new chair. He was grinning, his face aglow with the awful perfection of his logic. "And what about the chair then? What about the chair?" Enid looked at the chair. Her expression was merely pained, no more. "I never liked that chair." This was probably the most terrible thing she could have said to Alfred. The chair was the only sign he'd ever given of having a personal vision of the future. Enid's words filled him with such sorrow. He felt such pity for the chair, such solidarity with it, such astonished grief at its betrayal, that he pulled off the drop cloth and sank into its arms and fell asleep. Thank you.
Great. That's lovely. Thank you for reading that. How do you approach starting a novel? How does it usually start? Does it start with an experience?
When I got out of college, I started thinking I want to write a novel, and I went back to those pages that I'd written in 2 hours because I had to for class. There is something about having a piece of writing that was abandoned.
The Lamberts is a family from the Midwest. You were born and raised in the Midwest, and most of your novels are set in the Midwest. What is special about the Midwest as a locality within the United States? What does it have to offer to the mainstream literary and cultural scene? Also, I would like to claim that it has different social experiences and individual experiences as well. How can you celebrate those experiences without falling into the limitations of, local color and, literary regionalism that is often celebrated superficially, if you know what I mean?
I think a lot of Midwesterners, especially those who no longer live there, would reply, "You mean local colorlessness?" The Midwest is the neutral color of American flavors. It's, if you listen to how the evening news is read on television, it's a Midwestern accent. It's like this invisible accent.
But still, it's different from, cultural hubs. Like I'm thinking of New York, California.
Exactly.
Yeah.
New York has a strong flavor. California has a very strong flavor. I've lived in both. I like both flavors. The South has an incredibly intense flavor. It's where some of our best literature has come from. Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, both great Southerners. New England, Flinty New England, Edith Wharton New England. It's, but the Midwest, people are nice. It has the same problems, it's historically a very racist place. It's all of the American problems are well represented there. But I actually haven't put it this way, but I think the advantage of it for the novelist is you can set a story in a place that is so neutral it could be anywhere, but is still nonetheless specific enough because it actually has towns with names and rivers with names. And so you feel like, oh yeah, that's a real place, but it's kind of pleasantly any place. I mean, that's how it seems to me. Obviously, from an Arabian perspective, it's quite exotic, the Midwest, but it sure isn't in America.
Okay, perhaps a good time to segue to your writing process. How do you approach starting a novel? How does it usually start? Does it start with an experience, a particular experience that you have, an idea? And then how does it go from there?
I am by choice an amateur novelist. I don't think I have it in me to be a professional novelist, which means every time I do it, I have to figure out how to do it again. I figured it out 6 times. If I'm lucky, I might figure it out once or twice more, but it's really different every time. One thing that has been a theme until Crossroads is that books have come out of something I wrote earlier. So my first book, which was called The 27th City, came out of a 10-minute play I wrote in college. When I had to bring a 10-minute play to class and I didn't know what to do. So I went back to an even older piece of writing, which was this stupid and in hindsight kind of offensive stage comedy about British colonial India. And I took 2 characters from that incredibly juvenile, ridiculous play I'd written as an 18-year-old and then as a 20-year-old, put those characters in my parents' kitchen in St. Louis. Then 2 years later, when I got out of college, I started thinking I want to write a novel, and I went back to those pages that I'd written in 2 hours because I had to for class. And I thought, well, there's something kind of interesting there. It was, and it has been that way ever since. There's been some fragment of writing that has sat in a drawer for a long time. And there is something about having a piece of writing that was abandoned, but was still pretty good. There was something there. There was a reason you wrote it, but there was also a reason you abandoned it. Having that to hold on to when you're facing the nothingness, the great nothingness, which is what the writer faces when they're trying to write a book or trying to make a book about a nothing. It's just like truly nothing. The screen is blank. The mind is blank. You've got nothing. Wait. Those 6 pages were actually, I hadn't looked at them for a couple of years, but they're kind of good. And just to have something that to hold on to, that's one of 100 parts of it.
Great, thanks. I mean, to me, as a fiction writer, characterization seems to be the most important and yet difficult aspect or element of fiction. The moment you create a compelling character that's convincing in its roundedness, complexity, or even contradictions, everything else becomes easier. I don't know if you agree with me on this, but you seem to be a person who pays particular attention to character building and characterization. And also you already mentioned...
In all modesty, it's what I'm good at.
Okay, yeah.
It's... and eventually I realized that I was not good at solving the world's problems, but I am pretty good at creating interesting characters. And then as a novelist, you've like, well, don't keep doing the thing you're not very good at. Do the thing you've discovered you're actually quite good at. So yeah, I take particular pride in my characters.
If you base your characters on real life people, individuals that you know and who know you, what do you do for them not to be recognized, not to recognize themselves?
Mostly my characters really are truly made up. You might recognize something you said, or you might recognize some little story that you once told me and I never forgot. But you would not read most of my main characters and say, oh my God, he stole my soul, that's me. Nevertheless, it has once or twice happened that I've drawn a little closer to life and painted a particularly, I think, nasty picture of a certain woman. I kind of based her a little bit on somebody who I'd seen at her own worst moments. And I thought, I can't do this. It's such good material, but I cannot do it. She will recognize herself. And I got a piece of advice from a therapist I was seeing. She said, describe the character as really beautiful, which I did. So that's a little tip. If you're going to use someone from real life and you're going to show them in a negative light and they might read the book, describe them as marvelously good looking. They're completely neutralized. They're stuck.
I'm going to talk about something that most of the people in this room will find relevant. Most of people in Saudi, most of writers, creative writers particularly in Saudi, and perhaps in the Arab world, are not professional writers. They're amateur in the sense that they only have time to write at night, I guess, or early morning. It's something that you do on the side. Of course, you're proud of it. You try to work hard in achieving something that you want to achieve. Do you think it's important to approach writing as a full-time job?
It's really tricky, and it's a little, people who write in English, to some extent, people who write in Spanish. This may actually be true for people who write in Arabic, but if there's a chance to actually earn money with your writing, like make a living, as I somehow amazingly have my whole life. I've made a living as a writer. If I were, and I have writer friends in places like Romania, and it's like, it's hopeless. There's just They write a short story, they put it in the best magazine, they get paid in copies of the magazine. They write a novel, great publisher, 2,000 euros. You can't make a living. And it's not their fault they're writing in Romanian, but it's just like the fact. I'm going to assume things are a little different for someone writing in Arabic, that you actually have a chance of finding an audience that is commercially significant. I'm never going to tell anyone what to do. And I think if you are contributing to society as a doctor or an engineer, I mean, are you really contributing to society as a novelist? I mean, you're giving people pleasure, and I guess that's a kind of work, kind of responsibility, but you're not, if you got a better job, I'm not going to tell you to quit the job.
I'll start incorporating some of the questions that we got so far from the audience.
Ali, we could have such a great time talking all evening. But I'm also delighted to have a few questions from the audience.
Yes. What is the role of humor in your work?
I find it very difficult to trust a writer who is never funny. Even Tolstoy can be funny. The quick version would be that when I read something that is wound so tightly and narrated so seriously, I kind of picture being in a room with that person, and is that the person you want to spend an evening with? The person who's always so serious and wants to talk about the most important things and does it in this sort of tremblingly earnest voice. And if you try to say something funny, they look almost offended, like, you're not, what's that? This is really serious. I'm a serious person. Do you want to be, first of all, do you want to be that person? Second, do you want to spend time with that person? And really what you're doing when you're reading a novel is you're spending time with someone. So if it doesn't even have to be ha-ha funny, but if there's some comic sense that I pick up on in the first pages of a book, I relax. It's like, okay, this person has worked out their shit and now we can just relax and have a good time. I'm not going to be made party to somebody's serious mission. I'm going to have fun with them, which is what I think you want to be doing as a reader and providing as a novelist.
You tend to write rather long novels. When you initially set out, do you more or less have the story in place?
No.
Okay, cool. Move on. Okay. Earlier on, you spoke about how...
Very quickly,
Okay.
I do try to have some place I'm trying to get to, but it's death when I know exactly how to get there. It's an adventure if I have no idea how I'm going to get there, but it kind of feels like the right place to go. So yeah, it's not like you can't have no idea, but I try to be available for surprises.
A modern form of physical book is an audiobook. What do you think? What's your perspective on audiobooks?
They're great for a long car trip, or if you are doing household chores and you want to listen to something, they're great. The only problem for me is that just that the writer likes to be in control of their world, the reader, want to be in control of my world. I want to imagine it the way I picture it, and I want to hear the voice. I don't want to hear Scarlett Johansson doing the voice of Alice Munro. I can hear Alice Munro in my head clearly through what's on the page. So there's always a little bit of who's that speaking in this person's voice for me? So anyway.
I just would like to ask you, what are you looking for in terms of birds? Where are you going in Saudi? And are there any birds native to the region that you're looking forward to seeing?
There are many birds.
Okay.
With all respect to the book fair, if there hadn't also been lots of cool Arabian birds, I would not have traveled from California to be here now. And I mean that. It is genuine respect. This fair is amazing, and the public support of it is amazing to see. So nevertheless, it's a long way from California. Pretty much every bird that you need to come to Arabia to see is something I'm interested in seeing. I would mention we're mostly going to be down in the Southwest. So the combination of where the desert meets the mountains, meets the mangroves, meets the Red Sea. That's just the diversity is very high there. It's very cool. It's and it's like completely, I suspect, like unlike anything I've ever seen. I've never been to that part of the world. Quickly, a couple of birds. I would like to see a desert owl. I would like to see the Asir magpie, which is found only in a very, very tiny region. I would like to see the Arabian grosbeak. And even though I don't think we're going to, a hypocalius would be a dream.
But can you please say something about, birding as a hobby and fiction writing as a profession? What does each one of them feed into the other? What have you learned as a bird watcher, but also as a fiction writer at the same time? Does one affect the other, and in what ways?
You're in a hurry, of course. I mean, you're in a hurry maybe because you're working another job. You don't have much time for the writing. You're in a hurry to prove something. You're in a hurry to get it out there. You're in a hurry just to finish something. But you can't necessarily hurry. It's rare that you can hurry art. Some things just like pop into existence quickly. But I think the art of the novel is not first thought, best thought. It's 10,000th thought, better thought, 20,000th thought. Yeah, that'll work. And of course, bird watching is a lot about patience. You're waiting for the bird to come out. You're walking mile after mile, not seeing anything. Keep going, because there's a reward.
We come to the conclusion of our conversation. Thank you, Joonathán, very much for being with us tonight. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your stay in Saudi.
I'm sure I will.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for everyone who has made this possible. Thank you. أعتقد واحد من أهم الأشياء اللي ذكرها اليوم جوناثان أنه شاركنا تجربته الطويلة في كتابة الرواية. تحدث عن اللحظة التي تأتي فيها الأفكار، متى يبدأ الرواية، كيف تبدأ الرواية، كيف يبني الشخصيات، مجموعة من العناصر المهمة بالنسبة لأي شخص يقدم على الكتابة الإبداعية. وأعتقد أن تجربته مهمة جدا في هذا المجال.
My message to writers everywhere: have fun writing, and the reader will have fun reading.
كيف تصف لنا رحلة ال10 أعوام؟
أنا ما فكرت إني بستمر 10 أعوام، لأن الفكرة كانت خوف فقط.
كيف تتعامل مع توقعات القراء؟
الكل لما يسمع أنها قصة خيالية معناها كل شيء فيها خيال. لا، غير صحيح. يعني لا يوجد خيال مطلق 100% ولا واقع مطلق 100%. المزج بين الاثنين هنا الفن والإبداع.
هل ترى أن للفانتازيا الغربية تأثير على كتابتك؟
أنا مؤمن أن الفانتازيا أصلها شرقي أصلاً، هم اللي تأثروا بنا وليس العكس.
يقال أن كل الشخصيات التي يكتبها الروائي تعبر عن بعض دواخله. ما صحة هذا الكلام بالنسبة للأستاذ سامي؟
في شخصيات أنا كتبتها جداً ظالمة وسيئة لكن أين أنا فيها؟ هذا عاد سؤال صعب أجاوب عليه.
هل تجد أن تحويل أفكارك إلى مشاهد بصرية يعني يتطلب نوع مختلف من الإبداع مقارنة بالسرد الأدبي؟
وحتى أسلوب مختلف، لأنك تشرح للشخص سيصور، وأعتقد أن حتى السينما تختلف، تحتاج بداية مختلفة ونهاية قممية، ففيها أمور.
كيف شعورك بما أن أصبح الناس تقدر تصنيف الفانتازيا؟
الأشياء تكتسب قيمتها بمن يؤمنون بها وينصرونها.